Kia ora koutou, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on community perspectives run by refugees as survivors. Ko Shaymaa, ko Kaitohu Tika Tangata ki te kahui Tika Tangata ki te whanganui atara. I am a human rights advisor with the Human Rights Commission, and I am super excited to be facilitating this kōrero today with two incredible community members. Just before I introduce them, I do want to go over just the format. So we will be having a kōrero between ourselves on community perspectives, but there is a question and answers tab on the Zoom call, so please feel free to enter your questions in there, and then hopefully at the end we'll come to that. Just to respect tikanga as well, I do want to start off this hui with a really quick karakia from the Commission, and then I will introduce our speakers. Whakatakati hoi ki te uru, whakatakati hoi ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihe mauri ora. Awesome. So our two awesome speakers today are Hafsa Tamesuddin. Hafsa has left her homeland almost 10 years ago. She was resettled in Aotearoa, New Zealand in January 2019 after spending 8 years in Malaysia as a stateless ethnic Rohingya born in Myanmar. While in Malaysia, she worked for the UNHCR as a case manager for Rohingya community child protection and as an interpreter. She served as a panelist at the Global Refugee Forum in Geneva in 2019. And Hafsa is now in her second year of MIT studying social work. We also have Guled Mire, who is a former refugee and who's passionate about advancing and encouraging the social well-being, inclusion, and development of Aotearoa New Zealand's ethnic and former refugee communities. He is recognized as one of New Zealand's most prominent young voices advocating for a more humane, inclusive, and welcoming society. He serves on the boards of a number of community organizations and is the co-founder of Third Culture Minds, a nonprofit organization dedicated to unlocking the potential of ethnic youth and improving their mental health and well-being outcomes. And he is, as much of you have heard recently, a Fulbright scholar and is onto his new journey very, very soon as well. So yeah, just before we begin this kōrero, wanna ask both of you how you're doing during these very interesting times that we're currently finding ourselves in.
I think I'm going to pass this one over to Hafsa first, given that she's in Auckland, and I feel like we need to hear a little bit more about how lockdown is impacting her, and given that it's much more, I guess, more serious than it is in Wellington at the moment.
Thank you. I would say it's we are more prepared this time. This is not the first time we're having this lockdown. And it's not just only me. I see people around me are being less panic and more prepared, and we're showing more kindness to each other, being responsible about what we do and what we shouldn't do. And I would say I'm managing better now, and yeah, staying positive. And I think our government is pretty much upfront and taking the necessary measures that needs to be taken to contain it as soon as possible. So not that bad, great.
Awesome, we're all rooting for you guys and hoping that this definitely passes as soon as possible. And how are you doing, Guled?
Alhamdulillah, no, I'm doing really, really well. Firstly, it's a real privilege to be able to join this conversation tonight and to alongside someone who I look very much up to, Hafsa and Shaymaa. Thank you for being our host. I was really excited when actually it was announced that you'd be hosting this, and I knew that you would be guiding us through a much needed conversation. I think, you know, when it comes to COVID, yeah, like Hafsa, I agree. I think we're in a much better situation. I think for me, the thing that is really on my mind to the same extent that it was on my mind in the previous lockdown was, you know, some of these, I guess, conversations that we have about refugees, refugee resettlement, and all of this. These are really discussions that have really been put on the back burner. And it just, I guess, with the current global pandemic and everything else that's going on, it makes it even that extra harder for us to be able to continue these conversations. But I'm grateful that these webinars are still providing the foundation for us to be able to do that. So it's good to join you. I'm good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially during this lockdown period and, you know, living through a pandemic, it's it has its perks in a sense that it's brought a lot of people closer together. So yeah, it's been really great connecting with people both in Aotearoa, but also outside of Aotearoa, because all of us are at home. So we have more time to connect and really build that community amongst each other. And I guess when we're talking about community, one of the things that is really important for us to touch on or have a quote about is the very beginning of the journey, especially for former refugees in Aotearoa, and that journey coming into New Zealand and really building a community here. And you've both gone through that resettlement process. So it would be really good to get an understanding from both of you on your experiences of resettlement here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And yeah, I might just start it off with Hafsa, if you could start with your journey.
Yeah, it's the expectation that we had before we get resettled to a country, and the real world that we actually live in is not most of the time exactly the same. But I would say that it's not about good or bad, it's about like the system and how we integrate as the individual, and then the strength of each individual, and the trauma and the stress and the barriers that individuals have is different. And for me, I would say, while I appreciate the support that I've been receiving through the agencies, the government, the communities, and I would also say that there are things that we still have to work on to have a better understanding about who are the refugees, why do they come to our countries, and because when we live in a community, we are living with, our neighbors are different, right? We have different neighbors and we do look different than them. We speak different, and they need to know who we are and why we are here. And in the same way, we also need to know how do we integrate in a better way. So they are always good and bad, but to this point, I would say it's not too bad, or like, it's not like the smoothest journeys ever, but there are still a lot of work in progress. And I would say it was not very challenging. At the same time, it's not very, very smooth either. There are things that we still have to work on to make this resettlement better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think I would also very much agree with that tone. Have says that there's always going to be room for improvement. You know, for me, my family resettled here in the 90s. And, you know, the 90s was really that period where New Zealand for the first time really took in, I guess, a more substantive size of Black African refugees in that sense, following a period of unrest and, you know, in that particular part of the world. And in many ways, I've talked about this before, but I felt like, you know, my generation and the folks that in the ones when we resettled in that particular group were in some ways the guinea pigs, because the system didn't really understood how to really deal with us, how to really respond to our needs. And it was a trial and error in many ways. I think when it comes to resettlement, you know, growing up, it's impacted on me in many different ways, whether it's been in the education system, you know, and I guess my experiences with schooling and, you know, being told at such a young age that I guess teachers just having a lower expectation of me and stuff like that, just because I was from a refugee background, essentially, right? That their advice of telling me that perhaps I should be doing unit standards instead of achievement standards, you know, perhaps may have been coming from a well-meaning place, but the truth of the reality is that it was harmful. And I think that is something that I know that isn't unique to my experiences, and that's just a small element of resettlement. When we talk about resettlement, we have to realize that this is broad. Resettlement can touch on every single area of people's lives, whether that is mental health and well-being, whether that is, you know, just social well-being, whether that is, it's really, really broad, even from things like housing, even just resettlement in itself is super broad. So in some ways, I feel like I could sit here and like unpick it all night long, to be honest, Shaymaa. But yeah, I agree with Hafsa, the main thing being that it was definitely very much something that needs improvement, continuous improvement, as always.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all experiences are quite unique in terms of the journey and, people arriving to Aotearoa. But I think whether it's refugees, asylum seekers, even migrants who decide to make that change and come to Aotearoa, there's this sort of shared struggle almost with, there's the good, but there's also a lot of things that definitely need to progress for us to create a really unified and more inclusive society. And I know you've both experienced this journey at different times, but it would be good to get an understanding from your perspectives and your experiences on, have you guys seen improvements from the very beginning when you first resettled into Aotearoa until now? And if not, what do you really think are the key improvements that should be happening?
Guled, do you want to go first? Yeah, for me, my resettled journey here is like only 1 year and 7 months, and I don't know specifically what are the improvements that we have recently. The only thing that I know is there are a lot of renovation going on in the Mangrove Center at the moment. But of course, there are so many things that we need to be working on, and I would say it's like, because I've been studying this treaty paper, so I have this one assignment coming up next week. I've been speaking about these 3 Ps, and then I think we can actually relate to that, how we actually see these refugees from different perspective. How do we make them participate in the things that we do for refugees, and how do we make them feel that they are protected when they come to this country? Well, how do we see them as our partner when we do anything about refugees, right? So because refugees, including me, we have lived in our life under a lot of uncertainty. We feel insecure. We don't know what is waiting for us on the other end. We have been through a lot. And even if we come here, it's like when somebody tell you, okay, you go to this country, I give you this ticket of resettlement, boom, you change the next day into a new person now. It's just like a process. It's a lot of process. So I don't think anyone else who have never been to that kind of life or who didn't have any lived experience will understand as close as possible about what does it look like? What does it look like to be a refugee? What does it look like to be a stateless? What does it look like to be persecuted again and again, all this barrier, and then you suddenly came to a new country and you expected a lot of welcome, love, protection, security, and a lot of certainty in your mind. And then when you are here in this like different program, they invite you of this education, counseling, a lot of things happening around you. This is great. But looking at again, also again, back to my study again, I'm now studying about indigenous and Western thing, right? So when somebody come up with the formula for you, with a framework for you, a model for you, that somebody is not you. That somebody is not from your kind. I mean, not from your tribe. This somebody is from another different group of people, and this somebody have another perspective of understanding about these people, and they came up with the formula for you, and they want to implement it in working with you. You know what I mean? So sometimes there might be something that is a little bit off. So I think we definitely need to look at how do we actually bring them in on the table in discussion. And like I have mentioned, like as the participation and as the partnership, also make them feel protected. We hear you, we see you, and we respect your perspective of putting this in our work and the things that we do, and evaluation of our model at the framework that we are using, and coming out with a better, realistic framework for you. That kind of things. If we can do that, it will be great, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a structural change, I think, I think that is very much needed with diverse communities coming into Aotearoa, and more education, from what I'm hearing as well, is really needed, because without empathy and without understanding, not even truly even, you don't really have to understand what other people have gone through, but just at least try to listen and learn from each other is really important. Guled, what do you think? You're muted.
Yeah, my bad. In terms of what needs to change, Shaymaa?
Yeah, what should be improved, could be improved.
Yeah, I think, look, there's many things I could name for you. You know, I think firstly we need to look at our entire settings. We need to look at the way that we do resettlement. Is it actually effective? Is it resulting in good outcomes of integration? Are we giving people a fair go? Are we giving them the best ability to be able to make their biggest contributions and impact in New Zealand society? I mean, you know, many people will know that I've been involved in a campaign to, I guess, make our refugee quota system and policies much more fair, particularly those that have explicitly discriminated against Africans and Middle Easterns. That's one thing that we've done. There's more that we can do to be able to support refugees. We need more funding in things like mental health and well-being. People need to be able to access the resources and the support that they need. Employment is another big factor. You know, I think what Hafsa mentioned about representation is so incredibly important. The fact that decisions are being made in silos without our, you know, without our, I guess, consultation, without our people, you know, I guess, not necessarily taking our viewpoints into consideration. And these sorts of things have a impact on us. And that's why poor decisions are made about things that are targeted at refugees. So inclusion needs to be at the heart of it. And I guess we need to be able to empower refugee communities to be able to tackle some of the challenges that are facing through with, you know, from their own paradigms and perspectives. But so many things, education, so forth, there's massive areas for improvement. We are by no means anywhere close to being perfect or even great. We're good, but there's lots of room for improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. You just touched on something when you were talking about the kind of questionable laws around refugees from African and Middle Eastern regions. And I'm just wondering if maybe that's something you could touch upon for people who might not really know about that, and how the mahi that you did really resulted in changing those policies, because I think that's really quite important. And I think that also does have to do with this kaupapa that we're talking about. Community is important, and a lot of people in Aotearoa, New Zealand, who either are former refugees or perhaps they're even immigrants or migrants who have family overseas and would obviously like to be reunited with them, or you know, for different reasons, reunited with them, but there's that barrier.
Yeah, look, there is barriers that are placed upon refugee resettlement in so many avenues, okay? The fact that a complex policy was put in place that explicitly discriminated against some of the most vulnerable people in the world was just beyond belief. And the fact that this was allowed to simmer through low-key without really the public having no clue as to what was happening. And I don't know if it was just a lack of, I guess, awareness, or people just really didn't care. Honestly, it was quite difficult to tell, because it took a national tragedy for us to be able to highlight this and bring it to the forefront. That isn't the only explicitly structural barriers that are placed against refugees when it comes to resettlement, okay? And I want to include asylum seekers in this conversation, because that is an important group of really vulnerable communities that are here in Aotearoa who do not have access to the basic entitlements that they should be getting, as you know, based on international refugee law. And I think that is an area of its own that requires its own dedicated focus and attention that is really, really significantly underlooked. But I want to give you another example in terms of refugee resettlement, okay? When refugees resettle here, if you come to this country and you don't have an extended family or family connections, you're eligible for what we call family reunification. That is on top of existing places that are set for the quota refugee system. Now, the process for you to be able to undergo this is incredibly complex. Imagine coming here, not really understanding the language, not really understanding how the system works and operates, yet going through this incredibly complex process to be able to just resettle your family. Then you don't have the adequate support and resources that you need. which is why great organizations like the Family Refugee Reunification Trust exist, that there are wonderful Kiwis that have been mobilizing to fundraise donations to be able to support refugee families in reuniting with their, relatives. It's things like that are just unnecessary bureaucratic barriers that are created for refugees. Not realizing that actually refugees being reunited with their family and their community and their loved ones is great for their integration outcomes, which ultimately is great for New Zealand as a whole. Yet we make things so much more difficult and harder.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a time like this, when people are already quite divided and disconnected because what's happening, it becomes even more challenging. And you guys have already touched on this. So you've said that obviously some of the challenges that former refugees suffer or struggle with in Aotearoa are a bunch of different things that could range from lack of funding and resources for things like, access to employment and mental health services, having voices at the table, family reunification being more accessible as well. Are there any, from both of you, I would like to know if there are any other main challenges that you think are quite not really acknowledged, I guess, in New Zealand that ought to be acknowledged. Hafsa, if we could start with you, maybe.
I think the kind of services that we have for the refugee communities is great, but I think we just need to expand it. Not like for some organization, they have limited funding. So they have limitation of like, we can only have a family within this period, or an individual only this many times, or like 2 times, 3 times. So as I've mentioned, the individual's capacity of coping and dealing and integrating in a new country can be very different. And it's almost like a scary part, even for me, although I have English language, and I was really feeling uncertain and insecure for the first few months. I don't know, and understanding the system, except the very simple thing about how do I get an appointment with working income? Even if I go to working income, how do I make this stuff from working income understand that I am a refugee and this is my entitlement? And there was a time that I really feel intimidated how the way I was treated for one of the staff from working income, not knowing the entitlement of refugees and questioning me. So it's like I have mentioned, integrating in a new country is a process. It's not like, I don't think I can define it for like, okay, 6 months, 1 year, and 3 months for each individual. It's a process. And again, it's depend on individual capacity of coping mechanism and what that individual has been through and what is their strength and weakness, and then the capacity to be able to integrate. So we definitely need to look at like, how do we practically be able to support the people based on the needs of the people? You know what I mean? We as an organization, as the agency, of course, we have the things that we need to meet at the end of the budget year. We need to show it to our donor, and we did this job and this job. I get that. But on the other hand, if we are actually meaning to give the support that the people need, we really need to be looking at, are we actually providing the kind of support that the people need practically? The very simple thing can be like, okay, a refugee family need to go to clinic and they don't know where to go. And then the service provider can only see the person only on that particular day. And this refugee family have a very sick kid, and we don't know how severe it can be, and they don't have the language, they don't know how to call them. So those little practical things. And there might be refugees that they really want to be like, okay, I'm in this country, I have some skills that I bring from overseas, I know how to do this, I really want to be working, I really want to have a life. But they have that, the lack of information between how do I use this skill in this country. And another thing is the barrier that we have is like, whatever certificate that we have in overseas is not recognized in this country. So how do we, there are so many little things that we really need to look at it. But to summarize it is, we definitely need to look at how do we provide the support that the people need practically. It doesn't have to be like specific thing, only because we do this, our service is only this, so we're gonna do this, stick around. No, if we can be a little bit flexible around the services that we can provide to the people, and people really feel like, okay, we are seen, we are protected, we are heard, and there are people who's gonna be holding us back if we feel like we're falling apart in our journey of integration. And in that way, people wouldn't feel desperate or lonely or scared. And I felt that too, even if I had the language. So yeah. So many little things that we really need to look at and expand it, and funding and the services that we provide. And then we really need to have those conversations with the refugee communities and really going to them and talking to them. Hey, what do you want us to do? And these are the things that we provide for you. Is there anything that you think that will be practically useful for you? Is there anything that we are lacking? Or is there anything that we can improve? You know, really having those conversations and evaluating and monitoring the things that we do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, so I know that the questions are supposed to be kept until the end, but it kind of ties in with this korero that you have just touched on, and it would be really good to get both of your perspectives. So somebody had asked a question that, is New Zealand missing a national voice for refugees? And do we need an organization led by former refugees that can raise these issues in the public and with government? So I feel like that really does tie into what you guys have been talking about and the challenges and how we can sort of identify those gaps to reach out to communities and be able to support them and offer services to them. So do you feel like that organization on a national level is currently what's missing? Good, I might, yeah, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Shaymaa, for that. You know, I think I'm not quite sure that that is necessarily the solution for what is needed. I think what is most certainly quite clear is that meaningful representation is missing out. We are often become privy to information after the fact that it's been already decided on. We are hardly ever consulted on when it comes to refugee policies or anything in terms of refugee settings. Many often we're not at those conversations, we're not at those influencing those decision table, people that are at the decision table. And I think what is required here is meaningful representation, not just in terms of refugee issues, but just across the whole of society. And for me, I feel like this is a message out for whether it's government or whether you are working in a non-profit organization that is involved with supporting refugee communities. Think about how refugee voices are being listened to or not listened to in the work that you do in its original, I guess, design in the early phase, and not just afterwards when it's really too late in the process. Who is around the conversations? Who are you talking to? Because if everybody that you're speaking to does not come from, at least, you know, of refugee, if there are no people that come from this particular background, and that is the community that you say that you're trying to advance work for, I'd really encourage you to really think about, you know, what more you could do to improve, because that's not good enough. It's not acceptable. And we shouldn't be having to basically continually ask for our voices to be included on things that concern our lived experiences, that concern us, and that have an overall impact on us. So I'm not quite sure that we are lacking organizations to be able to do that. You know, we have the refugee branch that is responsible for refugee resettlement. I don't know who they talk to or engage with. You know, there is, you know, service delivery organizations that are working with refugees, you know, part of their organizations. You know, my hope and expectations is that they are talking to the communities in which they're engaging with. And that shouldn't mean at the cost of us giving up our free time to be able to just do free work, free labor. Employ us. We are skilled and talented, and we contribute to all walks of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Hafsa, sorry, did you want to add anything to that as well?
Oh, I think Guled has pretty much covered, but I just want to add on one point that if we are not looking at refugee communities as a part of, if we are not bringing them in this kind of conversation, if we are not bringing the voices of refugees in the work that we do for refugees? Are we actually acknowledging these refugee communities as a part of this big society? Or are we still excluding? And if we are excluding this community, even after we get resettled to this country, it is kind of trauma for us, because in our entire life, we have been oppressed, excluded, and we have been neglected, and we are here in this country. And we came to another country under resettlement with the expectation of acceptance, empowerment, survive, and thrive. And that's something that we really need to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something both of you have really touched on, is to ensure that, you know, refugee voices are heard in the decision-making process and, you know, have a voice on the table. And so I guess the next question I would have is,
just sorry, I'm so sorry to cut you off there, please. I'm really sorry. I just see this awesome, fantastic comment that's just come in by Amanda. And I really cannot agree with her more. And I just want to mention her point that, you know, there is no homogenous refugee voice as well, that there's so much diversity. Just listening to, you know, Hafsa's experience and, you know, her, you know, I guess process with resettlement and, you know, even supporting with refugee communities that hang over there. It's both of us, all of us, including yourself, Shaymaa. By the way, can I just add that to the conversation? Have all multiple, diverse, incredible perspectives that we add, and I just wanted to acknowledge that bit right there.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for, I'm still trying to get on with this technology and read the chat at the same time as facilitating, so I don't mind for missing that, but definitely a good point. It's really, it is really important to recognize that we're not homogenous, whether it's refugee or ethnic communities, and that's a really big issue, because like I had mentioned at the very beginning, that every experience is quite unique, and what might affect certain people might not affect others, but it doesn't invalidate people's experiences, and, you know, shouldn't undermine them. But yeah, sorry, just going back to that question, you know, you're talking about having refugee voices included on the table. I guess the question is, how do we ensure that those diverse and authentic refugee voices are at the table, that whether it's politicians or government or NGOs, that they're actually taking those voices quite seriously and integrating them? What would you say is the catalyst or the solution for ensuring that those voices are heard?
I think it's just what we talked about, is that recognize that, hey, there is no homogenous refugee voice. I know that I often get, I guess, labeled as a spokesperson for refugee communities per se or whatever. And it's like, refugee communities are so diverse, bro. I mean, again, the same thing happens with me when it comes to Muslims. And it's just like, no, that it's a broad brush, you know? And it's such an unfair, I guess, expectation to be able to carry. So I think service providers, government, community, whether it's members of the public as well, they too need to recognize that. And they need to know that who else, questions that they should be asking is, who else is missing from this conversation? And how can I ensure that their perspectives are taken into consideration in this work? That might mean multiple forms of engagement. And when I say engagement, meaningful engagement, okay? That's the code word there, is meaningful. It needs to be authentic. It's no tokenistic tick box approach. We don't want that. We are tired of that. We have no energy for it. I mean, I certainly don't. And I know a lot of others don't. So what we want is meaningful, and we want things that result in action and results. That's what we're after. It's the questions that people should be asking is, who is missing from this conversation? Of course, we're never going to be able to like include everybody all at once, but I guess what counts is that you recognize and you are conscious about these important questions that we should all be asking. Who's missing from this conversation? Who isn't here, and whatnot? That is a big thing for me.
Yeah, and I guess starting at least somewhere is a big is something that governments should be doing. It should be proactively trying to engage diverse communities and korero and really important kaupapa. And one of the things I was going to ask is, you know, what do you think meaningful conversations are? But then I thought to myself, well, actually that's the sort of research that, you know, organizations and governments should be doing themselves, and not kind of relying on community members who already are doing so much of the work and the heavy lifting to be answering and educating them on this. A lot of the work should be quite proactive to begin with, and then, you know, the expertise from former refugees and diverse communities can be brought into that, and be really acknowledged in the decision-making process. Hafsa, did you have anything to add to that as well?
I don't have much, but I will only add on one thing, that we just have to realize that everyone has something to offer, and the people are the experts of their own lives. And we definitely need to look at people-centered approach. Instead of saying them, oh, these refugees, they didn't have a literacy background, they might not understand what does it look like. And instead of seeing the people as the empty parcel, acknowledging that everyone has something to offer, and the people are the experts of their own life.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing worse than being stereotyped and put in a box. And it's about time that Aotearoa, you know, starts actually seeing the uniqueness of our very diverse communities. The next question, I guess, is more related to the relevant situation that we're in at the moment in terms of COVID-19. And it would be good to get your perspectives on what do you think are the main challenges affecting or impacting communities because of COVID-19, and are they really being met at the moment?
You know, I think in terms of nationally as a community, whatnot, I think we're being just as resilient as we are. I think it's just, I think it would be awesome for refugees to be a little bit more included in that, I guess, public health response. But I know that organizations are working tirelessly in this space, and that work is happening around the clock. I think the thing for me that I've really been concerned about with the impact of COVID with the global pandemic is the state of refugee resettlement. You know, 1%, like basically, according to the UN, like, you know, 1% of humanity is displaced, right? That is a significant amount of, I guess, our global population that are refugees or displaced people. And that concerns me. It goes to show that even with a global pandemic, with borders shut, the refugee crisis isn't slowing down. Now our borders are closed. Refugee resettlement is at a halt with no indication of when things might ever resume to normal. There isn't even an appetite or for a conversation right now even about, okay, how are we still able to maintain our humanitarian, international, global commitments, the responsibilities that we have as a state, as a member of the global community, in terms of elevating some of those pressures, in things that we have adhered to in international law, international, you know, humanitarian commitment, you know, whether that is under the Global Refugee Compact. There's various instruments in which we are, you know, I guess, have signed up for, yet there's no conversations that are happening about how can we still do this? How can we still be able to safely resettle communities, yet still keep our communities safe? And I think we can do both, to be honest with you. And even if there is no conversations about resettlement in even the short or the long term, which I think is going to be very difficult in this climate to be able to bring out, there isn't even like, okay, what should we be doing that we're not doing now? We're not even having conversations about international aid, increasing our international, you know, money that we're providing to other countries that are hosting a large population of refugees. What further international aid can be provided to be able to protect some of these most vulnerable people across the world. You know, our quota was supposed to increase 1,500. Nobody is coming through these refugee resettlement centers with no kind of, I guess, plan B or like a different type of approach to be able to make up for the, you know, massive hole that we're leaving. That really concerns me. And it concerns me in terms of how long that will continue, who will speak up, who will raise and, you know, I guess be able to mobilize on these sorts of issues. Will New Zealand join us, or will xenophobia win over us? Those are things that have been on my mind, and that I have, I guess, you know, because we've fought so hard to be able to make our refugee systems fair and more inclusive for everyone. And now coronavirus has just really put these conversations completely on the back burner with no positions for us to be even able to reignite them. But we will continue to do our part as a community, but we can't do it alone. And we need New Zealand to join us on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a concept that is really missing from the current narrative. I haven't heard it really being brought up on when refugee resettlement will be continued, and obviously that can cause a lot of distress to different communities in Aotearoa, because at the end of the day, it is all about, like, I know I've been probably excessively using the word community because that's what the kaupapa is, but it is all about community, and it's really important in this in these circumstances more than ever. And so I really do hope that the conversation really continues, and I hope that advocates and activists such as yourself who are working within this space do get support and don't feel quite, you know, like they're fighting this fight on their own, and that we do step up. And I, like you said, I hope that xenophobia doesn't, unfortunately, in situations like this, it tends to really kind of be a very influencing force, but I'm really hoping that Aotearoa really steps up and connects together and realizes just how important resettlement is. Hafsa, do you have anything maybe that you would like to add as well about the impacts of COVID-19 on the community?
Yes, I will just touch upon the asylum seekers. The asylum seekers who are not included in many under the entitlement of many systems. So when the people who have entitlements under the system are being panicked and struggling, can we imagine the people who are being excluded from the system, how desperate they are and how desperate they feel to for their survival during this pandemic? And the other thing that I want to focus about is the people who are in detention, whether be it the asylum seeker being detained or other people, other vulnerable people in detention center, because we are specifically talking about how do we save our life? How do we keep ourselves safe? And in those kind of detention center, how to which measure and extent can we guarantee the safety of those people? And I don't know if we ever have any kind of conversation around these people. And these people has been always excluded from the system, like Guled has mentioned, and they are still being excluded. And the other desperate story that I hear from many asylum seekers is about the process, right? Okay, Guled has mentioned about refugee not being able to come to this country from another country because of the border restriction. How about the asylum seeker we already have in the country who have already submitted the application, and then because of COVID-19, we have been doing a lot of things online, right? We even created meetings and work, everything is generating online, but with the excuse of COVID-19, postponing the refugee hearing again and again for the asylum seekers. The process have been there for holding on for a long time. And the asylum seekers who have applied for their visa to be able to work, their work visa never come out. They are just like out of nowhere with this excuse. So we definitely need to look at how can we improve this system, and how can we include these people being excluded from the system. It is really heartbreaking. They have a life too, they have family too, they are panicked like us too, and their struggle is not like easy, it's real, and we can actually do something about it. Just with the excuse of COVID-19, we're postponing the interview, we are holding their process on hold to the uncertain amount of time of this thing. We really need to look at those things, I think. And also the people who are at the refugee camps at the moment, we know that their struggle is far worse than us. And we definitely need to look at how can we support as a state, how can we be a part of those conversations, how can we be a part of those solutions to make the lives of those refugees in the camps who are stuck there, just to make it slightly better. Even if we can't change the entire world, we can't change it overnight. But there is something, the little things that we can do, we can improve, you know? We definitely need to look at all this sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about asylum seekers in Aotearoa, As many people know, you know, a lot of them are held in detention in, you know, general population prisons. I'd be really interested to get both your perspectives on that situation here in Aotearoa and how we can change it, because that is a massive barrier to integrating asylum seekers within wider communities as well.
Yeah, I just want to add on one more thing. And there is another things that we definitely need to look at is detaining asylum seekers alongside with other criminals is totally inhumane. And we know that they didn't commit any crime. And seeking asylum is human right. Seeking protection is human right. And New Zealand is a country which is obliged to the International Human Rights Treaty. So we definitely need to look at all these things, and we have to start look at how can we improve all this system.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Yeah, just super heartbreaking seeing that we tend to treat some asylum seekers in that way here in Aotearoa. Guled, do you have any perspectives? I know you did touch on asylum seekers as well, but just in regards to specifically, you know, asylum seekers in detention and not having a lot of their rights met here in Aotearoa, what's your view or opinion on that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I totally concur what Hafsa is saying there. Look, this is a group of people that I most certainly need to consider to be as part of the wider refugee community, and definitely not provided what they should really be entitled to, which is just some basic decency. Really, that's what we're asking for. You know, nobody really goes out of their way to flee danger for them just to like find themselves in these really unfortunate circumstances. And I think the plight of asylum seekers is actually not well understood in New Zealand. I think there's many people that are actually just aren't really aware at all, simply. And we need to do more to be able to advocate for this group of people. These issues are not anything new. They have been existing for years and years and years. And I want to applaud, you know, the likes of the works of people like the Asylum Seeker Support Trust. They're doing some fantastic, incredible work for really supporting a group of communities that don't have much to be able to begin with. I want to also acknowledge people like Bernard Soma that are contributing towards, I guess, you know, ensuring that those perspectives of asylum seekers are taken into consideration. Even people like Yahya themselves, who have been courageous in speaking about their experiences and sharing their stories, has provided and will provide a better avenue for New Zealanders to be more informed about the experience of asylum seekers. We all need to do a lot. If there are people on this call right now who aren't from the community or looking for things to be advocating for or whatnot, I'd encourage you to write now to your local MP, to your minister, to potential political candidates, and ask them about what is their viewpoint. Demand that this is what you expect, and that asylum seekers, most immediately in the current COVID environment, should not be dealt with the way that they currently are, and greater support be provided, but also that the entire system needs to be overhauled and that it needs to be positioned in a way where we respond to the needs of these group of people. The other thing is that many people don't realize is that we invest millions of dollars, okay, in not supporting asylum seekers, but towards preventing asylum seekers. I'm sorry, but they're going to get to Australia before they come to us. Let's be honest, okay? We do not need to spend millions of dollars on supporting mass arrival policies and etc. No, that money can be better used elsewhere, okay? Let's actually invest that with our communities that are here, people that are here that are claiming asylum, who have a basic right and a foundation to be heard. And you're right, Hafsa, there should be no excuse for these court hearings to be delayed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, and thanks for both of your insights. I'm just keeping my eye on the clock, and I know that we could be having this corridor for hours, to be honest, because it's just so interesting and your perspectives are so valuable. But I do want to give time to the questions at the moment, just so we can make sure that we have some of those answered. Please feel free to keep jotting your your questions down at the Q&A tab, and I'll try to get through them. So one of the questions for both of you is, can you highlight what things happened during your settlement process that helps you begin to feel integrated with your surrounding community? Hafsa, maybe if we start with you.
What was your question again?
Sorry, so the question is, can you highlight what things happened during your resettlement in Aotearoa that helped you begin to feel integrated with your surrounding community?
I have to acknowledge the programs that I had at the Mangere refugee camps. The very little things as knowing the tip of the iceberg of the country, getting to know a little bit about treaty, the system, all this stuff. So it's just give me a little bit of understanding the tips of the iceberg. So that makes me feel like I'm not too unprepared to be thrown to the community. And a little bit of like, okay, I know a little bit of this system, not entirely, but it was helpful. And also like, I want to acknowledge this counseling service from REST, because I did needed counseling when I was in the camp. So having those counseling, and that prepared me mentally to have a little bit of stabilization, to integrate into a new society. Yeah, also having some medical team support and meeting some amazing people in the refugee camps and outside. And yeah, those are very helpful.
That's amazing. Thank you for that, Hafsa. Guled?
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna flip this question the other way around a little bit, because integration is a two-way process. It involves both resettled communities, but also the host communities. I think when the host communities have picked up, I guess, their weight of the equation is things that have helped me integrate the most. So what I mean by that is, you know, I guess from a young age, you know, when we first came to New Zealand, my mum had a, you know, those Red Cross like volunteers. Yeah, she had one. And I think she became more than a volunteer. And I think she, you know, obviously she's now like a very close family friend for us. And she built a close relationship with my mother. And I think, you know, even though it was quite difficult for my mom to be able to communicate with this woman who spoke another foreign language to her, that, you know, grew up in a completely different worldview, I really appreciated that she went the extra mile to be able to build that connection. And you know, I think having that kind of relationship, you know, in my mother's life, and also, you know, for me being able to feel accepted in places and situations that I've been, not necessarily always, I've sometimes had to fight for my acceptance, has been things that have really helped. So I think that, yeah, I think that's would be my response.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And that I think follows up with a different question, similar question, but Hafsa, would be really interesting to get your perspective as well, is about the work that the resettlement work that the Red Cross does and is currently offering arrival refugees. How do you feel like they've helped during the integration of asylum seekers, or supporting us, sorry, not asylum seekers, former refugees in Aotearoa to integrate in wider society?
So, do I have to say 100% honestly? Yeah, and they're doing really great and amazing. And I think it's not about how they are meeting the needs of the people. It's about, like, again, looking at the capacity they have as an agency to be able to support the people as much as they need. The human resources that they have, the funding that they have, I think what they are doing right now is amazing and great, but there is always room to improve. And refugees, like I have mentioned previously, the needs of each individual and each family is different. And sometimes they need more than the support that you provide them. Sometimes they are not ready yet to be independent given their circumstances and during this time, even though we expect them to be independent within 6 months, within a year, they just can't. It's just being them. So I think it's about, like, looking at how can we improve our services in meeting the needs of the people, and what are the things that we are lacking, and what are the things that we need. Is it the human resources that we need? Is it the community involvement that we need? If we need the community involvement, how do we make it meaningful, and how do we make it in a way that we can also compensate them? Is it that we are needing more funding? So looking around those, and also having the conversation with the people from the communities and getting them on really on board. And yeah, there are things that we can still improve, and what they have been doing right now is really great, because them welcoming this family from the Mangere camp and sending them to the home and opening the door for you. Okay, this is the home that you're gonna be living. Like, it's like really being warmly welcomed, like by another family member. You don't feel alone in the community, showing you around the places, the starting point, your beginning journey. It's really great and fantastic, but yeah, there are still rooms that we can improve.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's always space for improvement. Thank you for that. There's a really important question I just really think I'd like us to touch on before we run out of time. It's a bit of a long one, so I don't have my in advance, but somebody wrote, when looking at former refugee participation in senior management and the need to move away from tokenism, I hear the echo of the experience of Tangata Whenua. Where do you think that Tangata Whenua and former refugees can support each other to break down these barriers? And overall, how do communities engage with Tangata Whenua? So kind of that solidarity between both communities and how they can really support one another in this process. Good, maybe if we start with you.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot that we need to be able to do in terms of build our relationships with Tangata Whenua. I'm really glad that some of those conversations are you know, beginning to take place in a accelerated pace. I have been lucky enough to have been working with Ngāti Whātua in Auckland on an initiative that's about to be rolled out quite soon, which is a co-pilot kind of designed with refugee communities and Tangata Whenua, which is aimed at, you know, fostering greater relations in the two communities, but also a deeper sense of understanding of Te Ao Māori, you know, practices and traditions, and getting a better understanding of the whenua, that the people of the whenua that we live on. And that is really important. And I think there's so much more work that needs to be done in that space. Ultimately, what is great for Māori is great for us. It's great for all New Zealanders. So refugees, in my view, have a vested area interest in this space. You know, I think there's a lot that can be done in that space. You know, Māori have been have had their land taken away from them. They've been, you know, going through years and years of colonization. And with that, you know, when you resettle communities based on a humanitarian criteria without it being really well informed, it can create lots of deep divisions if the two aren't, I guess, having a positive relationship in that sense, and at the same time, I think there's a responsibility there for government to be most certainly playing a part in that. So, you know, Māori as partners of the treaty should not just be consulted on, but they should have a stake in decisions that are made about refugee resettlement from the get-go, so that it's not a later thing that ends up creating this us versus them, you know, type of atmosphere and feel. So that isn't a relationship that should just be facilitated by us as communities, that should be solely left on us. I mean, we're starting to do that. We're picking that up. We realize the importance of that. That is something that we support as communities, but government also has a role to play in this space. And they need to be able to facilitate that process as well. And, you know, and that should be much more strengthened in the whole refugee resettlement process. I know that people at the camp taught a little bit about, you know, Māori culture, but I feel like, you know, we can even do better at that, you know. Perhaps, you know, our resettlement service providers, people like Red Cross and others, can start to critically reflect on how they work with Tangata Whenua to be able to, you know, I guess facilitate more conversations in that space. I've seen instances of people being welcomed onto maraes, and we need more of those sorts of initiatives.
Yeah, Completely tautoko that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Good, you and I feel like are wearing the same jumper, the Te Reo Māori jumper. Are you wearing that?
Yes, you already know.
I'm wearing mine as well. Definitely, I feel like ethnic communities and yeah, a lot of people from ethnic communities are stepping up to fill that gap. And exactly what you said, what's good for Tangata Whenua will definitely be good for you know, new arrivals into Aotearoa. So hopefully we can step up. Hafsa, I want to give you the floor to answer this question as well before we have to loop the conversation up, because I see that it's 9 p.m.
The question, the same question that you asked, Guled.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely think that when people have some sort of, whether it's good or bad, similar experience, they kind of connect, right? The kind of loss and pain that Maori community have faced, and then refugee communities still facing this loss and oppression all along the way. So we have something to connect with each other, and also being having this good amount of refugee population in New Zealand. We are already a part of the society. So what we have seen for this 1 year and 7 months is the gap between these two communities, not knowing each other, not having those conversations, and feeling that insecurity of seeing these people, who are these people on our land. And then I acknowledge the fact that they do have their own problem, a lot of things unresolved, and they're still unpacking those. And on top of it, having us here and not having that platform between these two communities can create unnecessary tension between us. So it is really necessary to create those conversations and looking at how we can work together side by side for the better cause of this nation and for these both communities. And we definitely need to have those, and we need to build this relationship together. And in respect to our diverse worldview, our culture, and you know, the way how we do things. Yeah, and also honoring treaty.
Yes.
Completely agree with that. And yeah, it's just been, this korero has been so valuable, and I can see from the comments that there are so many people that are just so grateful for your contributions and the amazing mahi that you both do. I'm really sorry that I'm not able to get to all of the other questions. I'm sure there will be a lot more conversations like this happening. And I just really want to thank you both once again for giving us your time. And yeah, just from all the comments, once again, a lot of people are supporting you, and a lot of people support you know, our very diverse community. So I guess this is the perfect time, even though we're in the middle of lockdown. I think it's a chance for us to you know, connect and communicate amongst our very diverse communities in Aotearoa, and being small is an advantage at the end of the day. So we can connect a lot easier. And I hope these conversations, yeah, just keep happening, and that we can progress with protecting the rights of everybody in our community. Just to close off, I might just close off as well with the karakia, like I opened it with a karakia. Once again, it's the commission one, so I'll just do that and then we can close it off. Kia tautira ki runga I a tātou katoa, ruia, 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 ruia ki runga, ruia ki raro, ruia ki waho, ruia ki roto, ruia ki uta, ruia ki tai. He ana ki te rangi, turu ana ki nuku. Nā kia tau, kia mau, tihiwa, Māori ora. Māori ora, and thank you once again for your contribution, and po Mire.
For Mire.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.